All right. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you for the organizers of the Puzzles Conference for a really engaging and well put together conference this week. My name is Jody Goodman, and this is 10 Years of It's on Us in the Big Ten, centering primary prevention in student programming. I'm going to start with an introduction of myself. In lieu of having folks introduce me, I'm Jody Goodman. I use she, her pronouns. Professionally, I'm a prevention education manager. I got my master's in social work and a master's in social policy from WashU in St. Louis, in graduating off campus remotely in 2020. And then moving into prevention education in 2020 in that remote COVID era, and piloting a student prevention program at Utah State University, first entirely remotely, then hybrid, then entirely online. So I've had experience in all of those modalities in engaging students. And then in 2023, moving to Michigan State University. And in February, I'll have been here for 3 years. Um, it's important to know about me that I'm also an aunt. Down here in the corner, you'll see my four nieces. They're all a year older than this picture now. But the important thing about this is that the oldest niece has a folder called Places Where I'm Famous, and that is entirely slideshow screenshots of places where I put her. So it's important to know that she was here, and she's Abigail. Fabulous. And if you'd like to contact me, my email is at the bottom of the slides. It's also at the end of the presentation. I can't see the chat right now, but if you have any questions, there's someone watching it. So I'll try to make this as engaging as we go. And if you have any questions, please put them there. That's the best way to get in touch. Okay, the plan for today. First, I'll give some context and background talking about the founding of It's on Us, also contextualizing this in theory, talking about types of prevention, types of events that can be hosted, and that brings us to a possible programs matrix, essentially a menu of types of programs that you can either plan to host or you could present as options to students that you work with to host in any week of action. So for the context of this event and this presentation, I'll be talking about It's on Us. But many campuses do similar awareness and activism weeks of engagement. So, for example, Start by Believing was a program that was hosted at Utah State, for example. And then many campuses also do Domestic Violence Awareness Month in October, having a week or a month of events. And then April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. So the information in these programs and events can be applied to any of those sorts of activities. But I'm focusing on It's on Us just to keep it consistent across campuses. Then I'll dive into the event review, looking back at 10 years of It's on Us, specifically in the Big Ten, breaking it down into 7 common event categories that show up across universities, and then highlighting some notable variations on common events, things that work really well and are particularly engaging and cost effective for engaging students. Lastly, we'll place those programs into a program matrix, creating a balanced week of programming. And then here also a reasonable critique from a survivor from the University of Illinois that I tried to use to inform some of my event planning. And then at the end, I want to share the most recent week of action that Michigan State University did and show how that fits into the programming matrix as an example. Okay. Jumping in. It's on Us was founded in September 2014 as a public awareness campaign of the Obama-Biden administration, following a recommendation from the White House Task Force to Prevent Sexual Assault that noticed the importance of calling everyone on campus into the conversation of sexual assault prevention. So you'll see on the screen the mission of It's on Us, the way it's written. It's on Us is a mission to build the movement to combat sexual assault by giving students of all identities, and this parenthetical here, especially young men, the tools to address the cultural norms at the root of sexual harm. So you really see that focus on inclusivity, on reaching out to and bringing in folks who aren't normally targeted within the conversation about prevention of sexual violence. And since then, in 2014, It's on Us has grown into the nation's largest nonprofit program dedicated to college sexual assault prevention. Michigan State University has hosted It's on Us programming since about 2015, and I personally led 4 semesters of programming since fall 2023. It's on Us is uncommon amongst prevention programming that I've been involved in a couple of ways that make me want to highlight it in this presentation today. It's primarily student-led rather than created by staff and presented to students. So sometimes the committees are organized by staff, but the ideas and the work is really student-driven. It's on Us, and these sort of awareness events are optional rather than required by governments or by university mandates. So it engages students sort of on a different level that's voluntary. It's also really positive and action oriented rather than reminders of policy, which are really important. And I do that. That's like 90% of what I do. So it's really great to have this opportunity that can be really joyous, looking at some of the fun that we can have working in primary prevention and bringing people into this conversation. So for those reasons, I wanted to put special effort into analyzing whether we're being successful stewards of the It's On Us legacy. So I have data to share. I'm kind of a numbers person, but also in terms of It's On Us and campus prevention, in general, we're talking about the types of conversations that aren't really quantifiable. Like a student who came up to one of our booths at the library and said, I think my roommate's dealing with something kind of similar to this. Is there something that I can say to be helpful to him? And getting to have that conversation just because we were in that location. So I know that the work that everyone in this call, everyone at this conference does to prevent violence and to support impacted students is valuable, like beyond measure. And many of us are in positions where that value increasingly needs to be justified and quantified. So, in the following presentation, is my best effort to think about It's On Us programming systematically, including measuring the cost per student engagement for some of the types of programs that I'll show you. Okay, moving into sort of the theory behind this, one common and useful way to classify sexual violence prevention and intervention response efforts from a public health perspective is to adapt the Commission on Chronic Illnesses Disease Prevention Classification Framework in a way that identifies activities according to when they occur in relation to the violence. So primary, secondary, and tertiary. Tertiary prevention includes long-term responses after violence has occurred to deal with the lasting consequences, to minimize its impact, and to prevent future perpetration and victimization. So some examples of that can be counseling, could be respondent education, for example, survivor advocacy and navigating the systems to seek justice, and awareness raising generally to try to combat the cultural forces um, under or that allow violence to take place. So that tertiary prevention, so knowing that violence has happened, can impact people's attitudes towards it. Secondary prevention deals with short-term consequences immediately after violence has occurred to prevent the problem from recurring or progressing. So some examples when you think of secondary prevention, connecting survivors to resources, informing students generally about resources so that they could let a survivor know, and some types of bystander intervention that occur after violence has occurred can count as secondary prevention. And primary prevention takes place before violence has occurred to prevent initial perpetration and victimization. So we're thinking things like culture change, reducing inequity based on identity that underlies interpersonal violence, and also things like bystander intervention that respond to harm before it escalates. So a comprehensive response to gender-based violence involves all three types of prevention. And I think the more primary prevention that we get out into the world, the less total harm that happens over time, meaning fewer people need to use crisis intervention resources. So we definitely want all types of prevention in our programming. And I think that it's reasonable to try to focus our efforts and our finances on that primary prevention aspect. Probably that is review for all of you. But just so that we're all using the words in the same way, I wanted to share the interpersonal violence preventions council definitions there. Okay. So we also have lots of different types of events. because there are lots of different brains out there, and our community members have mixed and sometimes conflicting preferences and needs for engaging in events, specifically on topics that are really serious and sensitive, like campus sexual assault. So, one important response to that is to offer a variety of ways that participants can engage with your programming. And again, I want to mention here that all events should think about accessibility from a universal design perspective. So, implementing as many common accommodations as feasible into the base event design, as well as offering options to meet specific additional reasonable accommodations. And so, one element of that I've sort of pulled out specifically here, outside of that, is having both active and passive events. So active events include like a game or conversation with peers or directly with staff during the program. So it's different every time. You have that active engagement component. But passive events are engaged with directly by participants asynchronously on their own time. So it could be a QR code they scan, a flyer they take and read, a handout that's posted, something like that. So like the types of prevention, both events definitely have their place, and I personally have a preference. I think that active events allow us to make stronger connections in the community in real time with folks out there. They give us more oversight over the way that the information is digested. If someone has a question or wants to push back a little bit, we can have that conversation. Whereas with passive events, we're just sort of putting that information out there and hoping that it's received, in the way that we put it out there. And also, there are drawbacks to active events, like being more time intensive and more expensive than passive events. So, again, it's really good and helpful to have a mix, which brings me to the possible programming matrix. So thinking about primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention, as well as active and passive interactivity types, we can create this neat little program matrix of the different events we can host during a week of action, or Sexual Assault Awareness Month or Domestic Violence Month, for example. So this is customizable to the event type you're planning, but it can help as a starting point for having a balanced week or month with a variety of types of engagement available. Like I said, all of the events have a place, but I think we should prioritize active primary prevention if we're asked to make mutually exclusive budgetary decisions, for example. Are there any questions? I'm going to check the chat. Most of this straightforward, nothing in the Q&A. I think we're good. Okay. So that brings me to the event review. So the past decade of It's On Us programming in the Big Ten has covered active and passive events targeting primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention. And before I go through some of those specific events, I want to share a snapshot of the planning teams behind the scenes. So this is a lot to look at. And let me, can I hide floating meeting controls? Aha, okay. Okay, now I'm even more dependent on you to tell me if there's a question in the chat, but it's important that you see my little legend here because I'm proud of my chart. All right, thank you. This table shows all of the universities in the Big Ten. It's a big 18, I believe, that have hosted an It's On Us Week of Action in the 10 years since its founding, so 2014 to 2024. This is based on my own research of publicly available information, usually published by student newspapers. So shout out to student journalists. They did a lot of really excellent work reporting here, and also local newspapers. And also some of this is directly taken from prevention office websites or student government publications. And I also presented this information at a prevention and response gathering of Big Ten prevention and response advocates and leaders. So hopefully any errors have been caught, but I'm open to corrections live and later. A lot of the response showing how universities have been involved over time for people who are involved now was, oh, I didn't know it went back that far, or I didn't know it started with that sort of planning structure. So I noticed in that space that there's, I mean, of course, over 10 years in prevention and response, a lot of turnover. So sometimes there's that lack of continuity or institutional history or memory. So it's useful, I think, to look back to see that in 2014 and 2015, we can see a lot of these a lot of the committee structures beginning over the course of those years when the government was starting up It's on Us and doing some speaking tours around the nation. So each cell, sort of to back up and explain my chart, because it makes sense to me, but it's a lot to look at, like I said. Each cell in the chart is an academic year when It's on Us programming was hosted either in the fall or the spring semester, often both. But I didn't differentiate between fall and spring for my own sanity. And the color of the cell represents the structure of the planning committee. So there are some It's on Us structures that are run just by student organizations. They're like a registered student organization that maybe receives university funding or is just volunteers of students that run an It's on Us uh, student group, for example. Another structure is university staff puts on events. So this is often when it's hosted by full-time prevention staff. Or, for example, it can also be hosted in student affairs. And they present these events for students to engage in and to connect them to resources, for example. Another structure is student governments taking the lead. So you'll see that in 2014 and 2015, a lot of the It's on Us structures on campuses were started by a declaration or an initiative by a student government. And so that often you'll see doesn't last as long because student government, again, has that turnover year over year. But it is a really strong way to start an It's on Us initiative and to signal the interest of students. But I did find in the research that mixed teams, so teams of students and staff working together, are the most common. So they took place the most times on the most campuses across the most years. And they're the most sustainable. So when the structure is a mixed structure, they had the longest streaks. So the longest streak was 10 years of It's on Us being run by a mixture of student staff. You'll see up here at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. In general, mixtures of students and staff make up about 50% of all programming that happens. And the other three types make up those other subgroups. Or sorry, the other three types make up the other 50%. And I also want to shout out the Ohio State University here that has It's on Us programming every single year since its founding, either by their student government or eventually by a student organization that ran itself. And so that was sort of the big picture research. So all of the events that I'll go over come from these weeks that were hosted at these 18 universities. But sticking on structure just for one more moment, when you think about mixed student and staff committees, there's more than one way that you can run that. And so I wanted to stick for a moment on some of your options, thinking about the pros and cons of different student and staff committee structures. So one structure is student ideas, staff logistics. So this is a hierarchical structure, essentially, where students are recruited to the committee. They're welcome and encouraged to share any of their ideas. All of the logistics and planning, room reservation, food reservation, all of that is done by staff. I'm going to honestly say that this is the simplest and most efficient way to run mixed student and staff committees, just given staff capacity and sort of our economies of scale, the ease of talking to other departments, being able to rent rooms regularly because we're a department and we've done that. So the con there is that it doesn't have that student professional development element where you're doing the work to support students in making those connections, in seeing what goes into event planning. So it's a lot of fun for students to be involved, to get to spend the budget, to get to really ideate on what would bring other students into engaging events, and for a staff member to just, bam, 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 work out those logistics. But that's not the only way to think about funding or to think about structuring these mixed groups. You can also have distributed responsibility. Essentially, you're leveling out that hierarchy. There are students and there are staff on the committee, and there really isn't, maybe besides managing an agenda, a designated leader who's in charge of all of the delegation, who is that one point person taking care of everything. This does rely on students to be able to step up and to take on that responsibility, that additional work during the semester. So that is sort of a con there. That is difficult. It's a volunteer position, so it's asking students often without pay to step up and to take on that additional work, which can sometimes be a barrier to students being involved. And it helps students to professionally develop. Maybe they notice that they are really interested in doing the advertising on social media. So they really step up to do some of the design on Canva and to advertise on Instagram, or they're really interested in, hosting one particular event. And so they do a lot of legwork to see what that would be like. So it allows for more student autonomy. But it can often, if not managed well and overseen carefully, sort of regress back into that staff doing most of the work, and then often at the last minute. So that's important to keep an eye on. One other structure that was interesting for our committee in particular at Michigan State was having designated student leaders. So it did have some of that hierarchy element, but it came back to having students in charge, including of some of the staff members on the committee. So there were designated student co-chairs that met separately with staff to sort of make sure that we were all on track, answer any questions they had, and then put a lot into that professional development, making sure that they knew how to lead the meetings, that they knew how to sort of oversee all of the logistics that needed to happen, but putting more of that agency in their hands. And so some of those designated leader positions, including co-chairs, you can also designate someone in charge of social media, someone in charge of design. And so sometimes having that built-in hierarchy, those position titles, especially when it's volunteer, can add that little bit of prestige and being official to that position, making students slightly more likely to follow through on that obligation. Okay, hydrated, ready to jump into the event review. So looking at the past years of programming so there were a total of almost 80 weeks of action represented on that chart. And I noticed 7 common types of events that I'll review here. And as we go over the 7 examples, I'll invite you to think about where you'd place these different events in the program matrix, and which you would select to create a balanced week with multiple engagement events on your campus. So we see pledge drives, video projects, keynote speakers, film screenings, workshops, art installations, and interactive events. And I'll go through each of these and highlight some notable variations, maybe how it's changed over the 10 years, or some programs that really stick out to me as we go. Okay. Pledge drives. I didn't actually know this when I took over the reins of It's on Us at MSU, but the original mission of It's on Us was to collect signatures to the It's on Us pledge. I don't have it written here, which is my bad. I will read it to you. It's on Us pledge reads, I pledge to recognize harmful norms that escalate into sexual harm and to identify how I've perpetuated them, to intervene in situations where consent has not or cannot be given, to join in the conversation about collective responsibility and therefore collective action in preventing sexual violence, and to create an environment in which survivors are supported and sexual harm cannot be normalized. And so a lot of events have a pledge drive at the center of their It's on Us week of action. So a few schools incentivized participation in the pledge drives in a few different ways. So one at UCLA in 2013, tying the number of signatures to the number of students estimated to have experienced sexual assault or harassment on their campus. Another way is asking student organizations to take the pledge and consider how they can make changes within their organization. And I do think that targeting student organizations and thinking about how they can incentivize their membership to get involved and to think about harm reduction is a really effective recurring strategy that we'll see throughout this presentation. A couple of other ways are to compete with rival schools to bring attention to the cause, like Ohio State and University of Southern California have pledge drive competitions as part of rivalry weeks. which is a good way to get student athletes involved and to use that the natural competitiveness, sort of channel it for good, right? To think about how are we also doing the most to help and support our students. And then another way is free merchandise, including free t-shirts at the University of Illinois. We'll come back to this at the very end before you put out an order for all of your free t-shirts. So hold on that. But it is another technique that folks use. Another category of project that started very early in the It's On Us situation are video projects that encourage students to sign the It's On Us pledge. So sometimes they go together, sometimes they're just statements about culture change or about building awareness of supportive resources or about the work that's being done on campus to prevent sexual assault. So generally, it signals intention to work on culture change within an organization or a team. I think these videos feel most impactful when they're focused on students speaking to students. But there are other ways to do this. For example, if you have a celebrity alum, you'll see University of Washington has an example. But I'll show you these two examples and sort of let them speak for themselves in terms of the impact that you feel from these two videos. So when you're thinking about where to put your resources, thinking about how these videos impact students and also where it shows that the values of the university are. So I'll play this first one from 2014 with Jill McHale.
It's on us to create an environment where women feel and are safe. I'm Joel McHale, and it's on all of us to help stop sexual assault. I took the pledge, and you can too, at itsonus.org.
Thanks, Joel. Okay, and here's a second. This is from It's On Us at Illinois, the University of Illinois, from students in their Greek life.
It's on us to stop sexual assault.
To realize that 8 in 10 victims know their attacker.
A friend.
A classmate. A roommate.
It's on us
to do something.
To be more than a bystander.
To intervene.
To not look the other way.
To hold our brothers
and our sisters
accountable for their actions.
I am a member of the Illinois Greek community, and it's on us.
All of us.
So I don't think that it's just the inspirational music behind the second video, that the second is more focused on the student experience, that it shows students talking about experiences that they've had. So it really humanizes the issue. Whereas it's possible the other one does draw more eyes to the pledge, to the issue, and get more attention. So both have pros and cons, as many of the events that were shown do. But I do think that engaging students, especially through, for example, Greek life, through athletics, having teams make videos that they can show to students later on, can be a better investment than a particular celebrity, especially because, their star, shines and wanes. Whereas having a student that was always an alum can be impactful into the future. So these videos can be made by campus administrators, by Greek life, student athletes, by a student government, for example, even by just generally student orgs can take it onto themselves to make these videos as a way to engage in It's On Us. Okay. Another common type of event, It's On Us Weeks of Action, is a keynote speaker, an event that comes, in my opinion, with strong pros and cons for hosting. At the beginning of It's On Us, the most common keynote speaker was sort of the founder of the initiative, and he was able to appear free of charge for these universities and draw in really significant crowds due to his name recognition and position as the former vice president, former president. This might not work the same way today, but it's possible to find politicians aligned with It's On Us, for example, or prominent alumni that do violence prevention work can also be a way to draw in audience members, to get eyes on the rest of your schedule of events, for example. But unless your keynote speaker is willing to appear free of charge, this type of event has, in my experience, resulted in a uniquely high cost per participant compared to other programming during the same semester. So hopefully you can see the whole screen here. And what this brings up is over here on the left, you'll see participants per hour, and over here at the bottom is cost per participant. So, for example, a really efficient and engaging event was an event we call Seeds of Change, where we have a little fake plant that we purchased for $1 each on sale from Michael's, tax-free if you're an educator, right? And so that event was really engaging for students. Students were so excited to have a little fake plant. So hundreds of students came and took a little fake plant at just $1 per student. And what we were talking about there are the seeds of change that we're planting to do violence prevention on campus. So becoming a peer educator, volunteering as an advocate with our Center for Survivors, and talking about ways that students are getting involved, and the way that we brought them into that conversation was highly popular with that little plant. Over here in the other corner of this chart, you'll see keynote speakers. And God bless them, get their bag. It does cost more to bring in a keynote speaker. And unless you know that that keynote speaker comes with like a built-in audience, that you can bring in their whole past team or their whole past sorority or their whole, academic department, right? Unless you have that built-in audience that's guaranteed, or they're appearing free of charge, it can bring up that really high cost per participant. And so the climate at your university, including the student interest, the cost, and the potential audience size that you think that you can garner, informs whether a keynote speaker is a good fit for your programming. And it's also really important to remember, and for some of the later events as well, for more emotionally intense programming, it's a good plan to coordinate with Survivor Support Services or the University Counseling Program to make sure that there's someone available to speak to students both during and after the event. Film screenings are another common event feature during weeks of action. So some universities, like University of Michigan and University of Oregon, have found individuals motivated to write original content and perform that during their week of action. And I will say that this idea, even though it's from 2014, to have a student-directed bystander intervention short film contest and to promise the winner that they could be featured on the national It's On Us website, they would absolutely today still feature the winning film of your university's contest on the It's On Us website. I've emailed the national It's On Us nonprofit folks, and they will email you back, and they're really friendly. I'm sure they would absolutely still host your winning video. So that's a viable idea today if you'd like. If you've got film students, if you've got creative students out there, that's an option as well. Not all schools have that available or know about that option. And so there are films that are already made that can provoke discussions about rape culture in our communities and on college campuses. So some, like The Hunting Ground or Roll Red Roll, come with discussion questions already written and accessible online. So the educational programming there is already created for you. And again, especially for those videos like The Hunting Ground, it's really important to coordinate with Survivor Services, with counseling programming, to have support before and after associated with that program. It's On Us can be a really good time to pilot new educational workshops or to promote workshops that are available year-round to a wider audience. A few approaches that I wanted to highlight are the University of Iowa having an educational summit during their It's On Us week of action. So they had 2 keynote speakers and 4 breakout options during 2015 that provided a full day of content for folks to get involved. They also, in 2018 had a collaboration with mental health counselors to talk about peer disclosures with students. In the University of Michigan, 2015, bystander intervention with Greek life. Can't say enough can't say enough about how impactful it can be to provide food if you're able. It can certainly drive attendance. There are other ways to drive attendance as well. For example, working with student groups to provide programming that engages them or brings in an outside speaker or resource that they have said that they're interested in, for example. So another set of examples from Penn State in 2016, their Sexual Citizens Workshop, discussing things like hookups, boundaries, sex, and consent, really getting that primary prevention conversations going, talking about sexual autonomy and what that looks like in relationships. Ohio State University's programs target specific student groups, like I was saying. So it's not only, bribing them with free Chipotle, which is a big part of our programming, but also thinking really specifically about more advanced conversations that students want to have. So, all year round, we have, consent, bystander, basic policy conversations, but what can we do that's a little more advanced during those weeks? So, for example, the Multicultural Greek Council had a toxic masculinity discussion at Ohio State, or bringing in an external org, the Black Queer Coalition, to talk about healthy, unhealthy coalition relationships, specifically in the Black queer context. So, getting specific and partnering with students to see who they'd like to hear from can also be really impactful. Flipping the script, enjoying coffee and donuts, talking about cultural scripts related to consent, power, and sex. Also a really good primary prevention workshop happening at the University of Maryland just last year. Art installations can be a really impactful way to convey the messages of It's on Us. You have the option to display art made by survivors, as in the Alcohol is Not Consent mobile art gallery in 2014 at UCLA, and Stop Telling Women to Smile by Tatiana Fazla-Lizadeh in University of Illinois in 2016. Another path is to ask for art contributions, like the University of Nebraska's Poetry Slam, or interactive art installations, like the Vision Wall at the University of Iowa, that asked, what would a world without sexual violence look like? And asked passerbys to envision that and to participate. Other art installations serve to communicate the scale of the impact of gender-based violence in the university community, like the survivor flag displays that have happened at Rutgers, New Brunswick, for example, or the Empty Chair campaign at Rutgers that take different approaches to visually representing the impact of violence. And so when it comes to survivor flag displays, those are visually really impactful and moving. There are a couple of notes that have stopped us from doing that exact same programming at Michigan State as it is currently functioning. The first is that I've promised our facilities folks that I will not, and this is a quote, penetrate the lawn. So I'd rather stay on their good side. And so you could do that as a form of protest, and I'm not going to say that's not valid, but right now that isn't a path that we're walking down. And the other consideration that was really important to us, especially because these events take place often at the same time, and especially in April as finals, really high intensity academic pressure times, we didn't want to just be highlighting the scope of the issue in a way that was traumatizing or really triggering, activating for survivors on campus, right? We want to balance visually representing the scope of this with not overwhelming students or making them feel hopeless. So what we did with the survivor flag or the empty chair campaign specifically was have a chair as a representation of the folks who have had to leave the university, to acknowledge that folks have left their academic programs, their departments, or the university entirely due to sexual harassment and assault, that's a reality that we're aware of and that we mourn. And here are all of the resources that are available on campus. Here's all the support that we have to try to help keep survivors in their academic program if that's what they want to do. And sort of connecting those two messages of that tertiary awareness building, here's the scope of the problem, with that secondary prevention of connecting, if this is you, connecting you to the resource, was a way that we found to make that event the most trauma-informed that we could. There are also interactive events. So we started talking about that in terms of some of the artistic events are more on that side, but some interactive events that I just want to highlight because they're fun to be a part of. Some of them are easier to run than others. Things like at the University of Illinois, having a denim day quilt is very common, and you can get creative with what you do with your denim. We made a big pair of jeans out of jeans one time, and so you can get creative with the messages that you write there. Chalk is very budget friendly, and you can get, very creative and beautiful if you've got some artistic students willing to go out there and do that. Rutgers having a Sheroes in History Jeopardy, some of that primary prevention, doing that, addressing just sexism and inequity in society is also a part of the It's On Us programming. And the point of interactive events generally is that it keeps students at the events long enough to have more substantive conversations. That deepens their connections to the messages and allows for a little more nuance than grab and go booths. The grab and go booths and the elevator pitches are really important. A lot of students are very busy. They're late. They're in a hurry. Valid. I was too. And it's great to have a little bit more of a script that you can read for students who are able to stay a little bit longer. Some other types of interactive events, resource fair and picnic is a great idea from Nebraska Lincoln, and that actually inspired a sort of consent and prevention carnival that we put on that was also a resource fair as part of It's On Us in the spring last year. Consent culture trivia at Penn State, really cool idea. Like I said, that vision wall, what would a world without sexual violence look like? Red flags and rom-coms trivia at IU Bloomington in 2024. That idea was really appealing to the students on our committee, and so we remade an MSU related version of red flags and rom-coms. I have a snip to show you in just a moment. But some other events that are high fun and like reasonable amounts of effort combinations, like denim day quilts and chalking, are also craft nights that you can have with resources available, like at the University of Maryland, having affirmation art, crafting awareness and understanding of relationship abuse. So you have craft resources available. You have maybe a counselor or connection resources to those counselors. That can all be really important. Some events that take a little more effort but yield maybe more potential engagement are like those resource fairs and picnics, or a trivia game night that highlights consent or anti-sexism, for example. And so, as an example, real quickly, hopefully this also plays. This is an example of a clip you can pull for red flags and rom-coms trivia. And the full game of red flags and rom-com trivia I do have as a shareable PowerPoint and a PDF. So this is an email me afterwards if you want the full game. But you'll notice, for example, the video that this is pulled from is Love at First Risk, Noah's Wild Ferris Wheel Move, Heart Fire Emoji. So this is being, even though this is a little older, is still in the cultural zeitgeist. This is a clip from The Notebook in 2024 of something that I think we'll all see in a moment as quite alarming, but that gets integrated into culture as something that's romantic or sexy. So let's, use that to start a conversation. I'll show you this clip. Oh my God. Oh, sorry. Just for context, Ryan Gosling wants to go out with this woman on the Ferris wheel, and she said no to him, and so he won't take that for an answer.
I'm gonna ask you one more time. Will you? Or will you not go out with me? God damn, my hand's slipping.
You grabbed the fire, you idiot!
Not until she agrees.
Okay, fine. I'll go out with you.
Well, don't do me any favors.
No, I want to.
You want it?
Yes!
Say it.
I want to go out with you.
Say it again.
I want to go out with you!
All right.
Okay. So, and that's in one of the most famous rom-coms, like, of all time. And they have happily ever after. And that isn't like the evil relationship at the beginning. So then we say, threatening to jump off a Ferris wheel unless someone says yes to a date violates which principles of consent? So we're talking about that Planned Parenthood paradigm, fries, where consent is freely given, reversible, informed, enthusiastic, and specific. So this gives our peer educator or the staff member running the event the opportunity to talk through what each of those means. And the idea that threatening to jump off a Ferris wheel unless someone goes out on a date with you probably violates all of those. Goodness gracious, that that scene has horrified me since I saw it. And so that's my soapbox. I'll hop off it. All right. So all of those are different types of events that you can bring together for a week of action. So generally, um, and also I do want to share a variation on one of those that we had at MSU. So this is a variation on that vision board from the University of Iowa that was envisioning a world without gender-based violence. We really liked that and adapted it to have sort of a more action-oriented question focus. So this bulletin board was present at all It's on Us events during the spring 2025 Week of Action and prompted participants to answer the following questions. What can you do to help prevent gender-based violence at MSU, at Michigan State, in your hometown, and in the whole country? And so students, staff, community members took time to write a Post-it note to think through what they plan to do to impact change. And so that was really impactful for the students running our events, for the staff in our prevention office to see people think about, and for us to be able to take to all the events to show that, you know, people who came by were thinking about these things, and here's some ways that you can get involved. And so all of that was a really meaningful event that we had hosted. So in conclusion, maybe some of you were following along. So I'll take the time. Let's go. Let me pull up the chat. Can I do it? Yes. No. I've made a horrible mistake. I can see the chat. I can see the chat in Hoover. What? Yes, okay, I can see the chat. Okay. Oh man, folks are saying things. In the chat. Okay, sorry. I'm reading the chat. Dim and Dave, we hosted jean donation drives and posted them to thrift stores. Okay, also, so in the chat right now, sorry, I'm a little scattered. Post in the session chat any events that you're excited about, also any events that you've hosted for It's on Us or for Sexual Assault Awareness month that I didn't mention. A big category that I didn't go into are events that have a sexual health and wellness component, because that office is a very different office at Michigan State. That wasn't really an option for our programming because of the way budgets and staff are siloed. But that is a really important aspect of primary prevention that you can also include. So that is an option. Another event that we had at Michigan State specifically, and I'll pull back to a really good picture of it here, is this event where we packed bags for a local domestic violence shelter. And for this event, we purchased all of those supplies ahead of time with our event funding. So these are things like self-care items, hygiene items, cozy socks, fidgets, just some things to make a stay in a shelter just a little more comfortable and humane. And so what we had were all of those items laid out and then blank cards where folks could write supportive messages. And so we had folks come up and pack all of those items together and write a card. And many individuals asked how much it would cost to do that, or if they could buy one of these donation packs. And so that wasn't the program we were running, but that is an option if you don't have the funding available to purchase donation items up front. That's one way you can run that program. Another type of event that we've done is to advertise the wish list for a shelter and to try to sort of buy down items from their Amazon wish list. And so there are more and less resource intensive ways that you can give back to the local community as well. Let me run back to where we were. Not seeing in the chat. Our student, oh, yes, I am. So jean donation drives is a great way, again, to potentially coordinate with a local shelter. Students love to design and make buttons. Absolutely. Keeps them at the table a little longer. So investing in a button maker, I can absolutely see that. And vision boarding is also a really helpful way to collect data from participants. So we've had events, for example, where folks come by and put a sticky note on the type of program they'd be most interested in, or what they think is the most important topic for It's on Us to talk about. Our campus isn't very interested in in-person events due to low student engagement. Okay. Are you seeing low student engagement? If you build it, they will come situation. I will say yes, student engagement is definitely low. And so we're trying to really focus on those low resource intensive in-person engagements. And so what was really important for us is having a grab and go element. So we couldn't often get students to stand at the table for a length of time. But if we have a handout with everything written on it, we have everything packaged up in a little to-go bag. Students did have interest in taking even a craft to go, and we're willing to think about or engage with those sort of things later. Someone saying succulents for Sexual Assault Awareness Month. Students definitely love plant-based events, right? And so we did have like some dirt and seed, so students could really plant a seed. But most students have a green thumb more similar to mine, and so we're seeing, a fake succulent goes over also very well. They could decorate the pot and stick around for a moment. And so engagement is lower, but you can still get folks to come out, especially if, for example, there's a food involved, if it's coordinated with a student org. So if it's a whole sorority chapter and you're involved in their, their weekly meeting, for example, you're more likely to get the audience built in. So to go where students already are, or to coordinate with the groups they're already working in, that can be a good way to start with a bigger audience, in my experience. But great points. And also, I love the succulents for some. And so this is how I put some of the events that I worked on. And let me get rid of the floating meeting panel again. This is the program matrix built out. So some events that broke down as active events and that were primary were our bystander intervention activities, where we were able to talk through scenarios where someone could intervene in a situation where harm was escalating and prevent harm. So we had a bystander booth where if people came up and participated in one of our scenarios, they could take away a little prize, and folks were interested in that. Primary prevention, active engagement includes the pop culture trivia conversations that challenge rape culture or sexism as well. And then primary passive are those It's On Us pledge drives and video projects. When you're able to keep students really focused on the theme, when you're able to think about, for example, what education or changes you could bring to a student org or to athletics to change that culture. I'll bring up in a second a student criticism of pledge drives that I think is pretty poignant, but they're not worth doing. They're just worth doing thoughtfully. Active engagement, secondary prevention, workshops on supporting survivors or co-survivors. When we did an event recently asking students what they were most interested in hearing about, supporting survivors and how to support a friend was a really common answer that was given. And bystander intervention activities that are focused more on maybe harm that has happened and how to support a person in that situation. A really common activity at all of our booths, we have secondary prevention, passive engagement, information about resources, and reporting. So you have maybe a specific It's On Us schedule of events so that you can let people know about everything that's happening, as well as a one-page handout with information about how to report an incident and all of the confidential or exempt resources that exist. And then we also had active events that were tertiary prevention. So these are more, engaging in the fact that harm has happened. How can we improve the university experience for survivors? How can we bring a moment of peace or healing? And so that looked like survivor support or healing events, for example, craft, journaling, also collecting supplies for a shelter, like I talked about. We had success with that. And then some tertiary passive events, depending on your relationship with the facilities and grounds folks, right? You can have those awareness events, art installations, bringing attention to the scope of the issue. But I also want to draw attention to, and then what can we do to support students so that we're not just triggering folks with the scope of the problem, but also drawing attention to the healing support and reporting resources that exist on campus. And so in general, and depending on your budget, you want to include a variety of different types of events because all different types of prevention are important for addressing sexual assault, and lots of different types of events and engagement methods are important for getting, and like we were talking about, the most students involved, especially those passive events that can take up a little bit fewer resources, but can maybe get more students to see that information and to have those resource connections as well. Okay, and that brings me to this reasonable criticism to share. This comes from, and I want to elevate this concern raised by a survivor in relation to passive events specifically focused on primary prevention, particularly pledge drives that focus on sort of a quantity over quality approach. So the University of Illinois' It's On Us campaign focused on trying to compete with other schools to get the most signatures right. And so one of the ways that they did this was handing out a T-shirt. And a junior, Tara Chattaraj, was quoted as saying, "Seeing my rapist wearing that shirt is the most shocking thing. It's jarring because you did this, yet you can hide behind this shirt and people think you're a great person." She said, "The initiative bothers me because it's hurting people and it's creating this false image that we're doing something." And so I keep this in mind when I'm selecting giveaways for It's On Us, as well as determining what sorts of actions that a student needs to take to like earn something with the It's On Us logo on it, right? It's a reminder that the value of the quality of our interactions is a lot more important than the quantity of our interactions. So maybe that's something also that we can start with when we're talking to administrations that are nervous, we don't have these numbers up, to say that like I do want to pump the brakes on trying to get the most students involved, and also look at are we having quality interactions with students? Looking back to that idea of maybe it wasn't 100 students came up to our booth, but someone came up and asked how to talk to his roommate about a situation he was dealing with, and that single interaction that afternoon really means a lot. And so trying to refocus admin on a quality over quantity approach, I think, is really survivor centered and important for the mission of It's On Us. So it's about engaging everyone, but it's also important to center on quality interactions over quantity. Okay. Just to end up with, I'll share a couple of examples of events that we had at Michigan State and sort of where they fell in this program planning matrix. Rom-coms and red flags was a lot of fun. Students said that it was engaging. And we're keeping that program around. So that, even though it's a lot more work up front, you can keep, if you use classics, if you have good examples, you can keep that program around for a few semesters. Reeling in healthy relationships, if you see right here, those fish, we just were coming up with activities of things that we could do to be weird, get students involved. So we had students reel in a fish. The color of fish they caught determined the color of question they got asked. And if they got the question right, I think we gave them a prize. Students were extremely into these little ducks right here, these glitter ducks. I'm not sure whether it was the fact that they were ducks or whether the fact that they were rainbow. The students were so into the ducks. They were coming up to us and saying, "What do I have to do to get a duck?" So if you're thinking like, I have $2 per student to get a little giveaway, telling you little rubber ducks. We did a variation of the University of Iowa vision wall, and I'll share some of those answers in just a moment to wrap up. We had a What Would You Do bystander booth to talk about how you could either support a friend or even engage in a situation where harm is ongoing. Sharing information about resources at all of our booths. We had a friendship bracelet finale, just an event where folks could get together, connect with other folks who care about prevention. We had a whole prevention palooza. Sparty came. It was a carnival and resource fair, bringing some of that joy into the work of prevention. The idea that, we can get out here, talk about culture change, talk about decreasing sexual assault, and have a really good time. That, it's not always easy, but we can have fun together. And that brings people into the work of prevention. So one of the things that I keep track of hosting It's on Us is how many students during that week sign up to become a peer educator with our office, how many students sign up to volunteer with the sexual assault crisis intervention team, and how many sign up to volunteer with our external organization that we partner with in violent encounters. And each semester that I've run the event, I've gotten more and more students to make those longer term investments and longer term commitments to prevention. And that's really what I think It's on Us can be about, is about letting folks know that there are careers in prevention and work to be done that they can be involved in both prevention and response, and they can have a longer term impact on their community. And so, right, like I said, this breakdown of event engagement per dollar. Can't say enough about these tiny plants, like folks were saying, the little succulents. Trivia over here is looking expensive only because I purchased an irresponsible amount of pizza. So normally that would have a much lower cost because that is just a PowerPoint. Things like the bystander booth depend on the cost of the giveaways that you're giving as prizes. Students might do that for no prize if you're just standing there. If you are, friendly and engaging enough, students may come over to have a conversation, especially if they're on their way out of a dining hall and not on their way in. I'm happy to stay and talk about any more of these events, but I just want to wrap up and have time for questions. So the very last thing I want to talk about is, like I said, this bulletin board, and share some of the answers that students gave on our community art project to show the long-term impact of It's on Us on student engagement in primary prevention. So like I said, this bulletin board was at all of the It's on Us events in spring 2025, and students answered each of these questions. And the last thing that I'll say before I look at the chat again to answer any questions, and thank you all for being here, I'll share the answers that we received to the very first prompt to think about what students can do to make change at our university and what they're probably doing at your campus. So here's what students said. They're going to be a safe place to believe survivors. They'll look for signs to help. They'll never stop learning more, have hard conversations with friends, stay aware of and connected to resources, talking to my peers about my experience, integrate awareness about gender-based violence into classes, show up, take up space, get to know your classmates, speak out against all instances of violence, check on your friends, listen, and take action. I think the students are doing really wonderful work, and It's on Us. Programs like Start by Believing, Sexual Assault Awareness Month, Domestic Violence Awareness Month are really great vectors for keeping them involved in work that they really care about. So bringing forward those options of here's how you can stay involved, here's how you can have a job in this, here's an internship, here's a volunteer position. I think that's a really important wraparound to all of our events so that we can, set up our primary prevention in the present and also have a really strong foundation moving into the future. So that's my presentation. All of the events that I cited are linked at the end of this presentation, and my slides will be available through the conference. Here's my nieces again. So this is a new place where they're famous. Thank you all so much for your time. I'm going to come back to the meeting. Wait, first, I'm going to leave it on my email, and then I'll put my email in the chat, and then I'll come back to the meeting. So close. msu.edu. I've done it. All right. There's a space in there. Minus the space. That's my email. Thank you all so much. Let me see. Let me come back. It's me. Again, thank you for being here and for being at the Puzzles Conference. If anyone has any questions, let me check the Q&A. The Q&A is empty. The chat is fairly chill. Any last thoughts, objections? Okay. Okay. Thank you all. Please let me know any thoughts that you have in the evaluation. I really do appreciate your time. Yep, the evaluation link is in the chat. I take your feedback really seriously. I appreciate your attention. And I hope that you got what you need today. Take care.